Hello YouTube vintage stereo collectors and restorers. I can't believe it. I'm looking out the window and it looks so good today. Clear sky, well, a little bit of smoke coming from the forest fires, but cool. Windows are open, it's so nice. Anyway, I got my coffee ready to go and I finished this Philco Wedge 82. This is a Canadian version. The US ones, it actually says Tropic in here, which is kind of interesting. I've owned both, and the Tropic has a shortwave band, this one doesn't. But other than that, it's got the tapered wedge. And you know, it's actually a pleasure to work on these every once in a while. I know they're not as popular as they were, but the open chassis, the point-to-point, a lot of desoldering and bending and fixing, but it's sort of real electronic work that makes sense in a world of things that sometimes doesn't make sense. But what I actually wanted to talk to you today about, and I hate to bring this up, no, it's not tube versus solid state. No, it's not vinyl versus CD or streaming. It's those darn STK modules that are found in stereos starting in the late 70s through to the 90s. And there's a whole different bunch. The earliest ones I've ever seen worked on are in some early Nico products. The TRM 40 version 3, there's 3 different versions I've worked on. The TRM 30 is like that. It has preamp modules, they're really integrated circuits. The pre-driver modules, and they're all very failure prone. And with those, they are unobtainium in those Nicos. You actually have to make replacements using your own circuit boards, and I've done it. I did a TRM 30. I'll bet you it was at least 25 hours worth of work in it, because on the left channel the preamp IC was blown, the right channel the power IC was blown, so it really wasn't working too good. But I got it working really well, but there was absolutely no payback on it. It was to get a really cool, I did a video on one of them, I think the second or third one I had, because of the wooden ends and the way it looked. I called it the Dr. Kelly Brackett Sideburn Stereo. But move ahead a few years. The STK modules, there's so many of them. Very common in the earlier lower power designs. You have one STK module as the power amp doing both channels, and which is really not a great idea in one enclosure. Anything that generates heat that's in that close of proximity, if you have an original that still works, don't play it too loud or for too long. I don't know what it is with those. I have literally, I can't say what it is, almost been taken around the bend on some of those. And I remember I had a lot of experience in these as a bench tech in the early and mid 80s, because many of them were in Techniques products, and they were coming back. And they came back usually when people pushed them a bit. And I'm talking about, like pushing a 30 or 40 watt amp, playing it loud for a little bit, not full volume, but they say, well, I played it a bit loud. Next time I turned it on, the right channel was dead. And there's a burning smell. Yeah, they just couldn't take it. And we would get factory replacement ICs, usually Sanyo ones, because Sanyo was the company that pioneered this design, and they were as good as the originals. And there's still a few of those floating around. Here's what I'm finding with them. They usually sound good when they're working. They can sound as good as a discrete amplifier. They can actually work a long time. Usually the ones that work a long time is a separate STK for each channel, like the STK 50, because there's better heat dissipation. There's also a couple of companies, but we'll get into this more later, but that make replacements that are all discrete with a board on a better heat sink. Those ones actually work pretty good, but I've had them fail too. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just sometimes there's certain things that you just don't want to work on. And I'll give you an example. One of the hardest things ever to take apart and to fix properly is the cloth shutter curtains on a Pentax camera, early Pentax 35mm camera. When the rubber starts disintegrating and they stick together, I see them at flea markets all the time. Students buying them to use in photography classes, and the shutter won't even fire. And I fixed some of them using parts from other cameras. It's a very similar thing. Nobody makes a new shutter curtain, so you have to either use 2 or 3 cameras to make a good one. But anyway, let's do a little rundown here. I have a friend who has a really nice receiver, and it's a single STK, uses an STK 463, and it's gone short circuit. The issue with that is, and I bet you have done that actual model, 20 or 30 of them since the 80s. And it's a Marantz SR1000. And they were coming back when they were new with blown STKs. Others survived. But anyway, let me put it this way. Here's what you do if you want to keep one going, whether it's in a Yamaha, some of the Sansuis had them, a lot of Techniques had them. So you can try to find an original Sanyo built new old stock. You'll pay a bit of a premium, you might get it on eBay, and it might not be new old stock. It might be one of the Chinese copy ones. And I had an Akai, pause, and I went through 5 STK modules on this thing in about half a year, until it got to the point that I was never going to be able to solder another one in because the solder lands were so weak from desoldering. And you'll notice that especially on Yamaha receivers that use STKs, wow, some of them you do one removal and one reinstallation, it's never going to happen again because the circuit board can't take the soldering. And so you can buy one of the Chinese copies. Every one I've installed has failed at some point. I had one in a Yamaha R300 or something like that a few years ago, and I thought, this is great, I haven't heard from this guy. It must be working. Then about a year and a half later, I hear from him. And he said, damn it, the first time I plug this thing in and listen to it, the left channel goes after about half an hour. What do you mean the first time? Well, he brought it home, put it on a shelf, and didn't hook it up for a year and a half. All the while I'm thinking, this thing's working great. No, it didn't. And it was a copy, it was bought off eBay. And there's some on Amazon, they're around $50. None of them are worth a darn long term. I don't know what it is, I've done so many replacements on them. The long and the short of it is, there's only one way to truly make it reliable, and that's to have a discrete parts on the circuit board, and I've made some. I've actually made one very similar to the STK 465, and it was in another Yamaha, and it took a while to build, put in good parts, beef things up, put a bigger heat sink in it. It was really a labor of love. And it lasted about 3 weeks. Turned it on, had a channel much lower volume than the other. And I'm thinking, oh, it's something else, it couldn't be that. Because I had begun to trust it, thinking it's fixed. No, it was that. I'm thinking, how is this possible? I put good parts in there. No, a resistor had gone open, and it triggered a failure of several transistors. It was unbelievable. So your options, you can buy an Amazon one, an eBay one. They are going to fail. And each time you replace that thing, it's harder on the board. No matter how good you are at desoldering and resoldering. the best option is to find some kind, like I've actually done this, there are several different IC based chip amps that work in that position, and there's a couple of videos out there about them. You know, one guy did a Yamaha R300 with one, and long term it worked, but it changes the character of the amplifier. And me personally, as far as what I use in my collection, the Kai I mentioned, I fixed that one several times. I finally decided, much as I love the look and the sound of this amp, I am moving on. I moved on to a Kenwood, I'm trying to think what that thing was. It was a KR3130, I think it was, receiver, which was had great sound. It was all discreet. One FET in the FM tuner. Sometimes you just have to move on. The thing is, it's the labor. So even if you buy, there is a couple kits out there that are made in the States, so they're not Chinese, they're made with good parts. It's $200 for the kit. And then if you're going to bother putting this into your receiver, like into the Marantz you love, I would recap it as well. You don't want any weak components around that. Especially if you start to trust it and you start to push it the way that it's meant to be. You know, run it a little bit once in a while. Otherwise you're going to have failures elsewhere. And the most recent one I did, it was actually a Sanyo receiver. I forget the model number, but I picked it up for nothing, and of course the STK was bad. It was blowing fuses. 20 watt per channel amp, and I actually had one. Sometimes when I buy parts I order extras, save on shipping, and it seems to always come up that you'll need the part again. Well, put it all together, this is working really great. Boom! 10 minutes later, there's a crackle and smoke as their outboard emitter resistors, as one of them overheated and started to burn. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that's, a lot of times I find the best vintage stuff is either all tube or all discrete, meaning all transistor. Sometimes you might just have to leave an STK one for another day, or put the money into it. Let's say this Sanyo, if I would have had to, if it was somebody's baby, I would have been into it. I'm not kidding, it's over $200 for what was a free amp that has a resale working about $50. That's the consideration. So I don't know if that's helpful, if anybody wants to add in on that. I have tried modules, so many modules, different kinds from different places, and they ultimately fail. That personally, I don't buy an STK based amp anymore, with one little exception. There are some Techniques Class H amps, and a GX, what was it, 330 or something like that. I had one of those recently. Those, for whatever reason, the output's never bad. Those were actually really good. A little different technology. The Class H amp, for most of the listening I do, the thing is hardly turning on. The output transistors that are in that case are not coming on hard. But then I've had other people that have run them hard, and they blow every time. So anyway, I mean, really all you need is about 10 watts of power for most music. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening. Have a good day.